I am going to beat you into the living death.
What the hell was that card? Yet another week, I have to say rip to any other fucking thing I want to cover on this channel because the UFC had itself an old-fashioned shit show in the most appropriate place on the planet for one to occur, and that decided to 1-2 poke my eyes into attention. Simply put, UFC Fight Night Fiorot vs. Blanchfield was a sloppy mess of fouls and peculiarities, none of which were particularly pleasant. That was some unintentional alliteration, I just got bars like that. Much like UFC Vegas 85 earlier in the year, this card had a little bit of everything terrible and bizarre, sandwiched in between a couple of decent individual performances. Unlike Vegas 85, this event took place in an even more depressing dumpster known as Atlantic City, which may have been going for a world record in setting trash on fire. Unlike Las Vegas in the West, which has their own bumbling commission to worry about, the New Jersey State Athletic Control Board said, "Hold my beer, rest of the country, we're setting a new blue ribbon standard for fucking things up." Usually I try to cover a variety of topics on the show, but this thing deserves its own case study, so let's run it down. To start the card, Angel Pacheco was outworked by Keelan Lochran, a man who looks so much like the Fighting Irish logo, I was surprised he wasn't knuckling up with his fists turned inward. Then, just when you thought you'd seen it all with the disqualification due to biting last week, yet another first for the UFC happens when Andre Petroski shot for a double leg on Jacob Malkoun and knocked himself out on Malkoun's hip bone. Legend has it you can still see the leopard print shaking in his hair to this very day. If your brain is not computing how this knockout occurred, allow me to explain. You see, Andre Petroski's temple made sudden and direct contact with the protruding portion of Malkoun's hip during the takedown attempt. And since Jacob Malkoun is a cybernetic organism with living tissue over a metal endoskeleton, it really all makes sense if you think about it. The first foul of the evening was your standard up-the-center nut shot in the Ibo Aslan vs. Anton Turkalj fight. This is also the first time during the broadcast that one of the co-stars of this tale, referee Gary Copeland, makes a small but noticeable contribution to the circus as Aslan is recovering from the cup check by Turkalj and says he's ready to go. Gary Copeland advises him to take more time to make sure he's ready to go, as there was still a good amount of the allotted 5-minute break left on the timer. This is not the place of a referee. If the fighter says he's ready to fight, you let him fight. You take them away from their corners to keep them from getting coaching during stops like these. Don't you start doing the coach's job for them, Gary! So that was minor, but something I took note of in the moment. Aslan would win by knockout? Fine. Some might say a slightly early stoppage, but it wasn't. Everything's fine. The second foul of the evening was the next fight, Bazookia vs. Matthews, also minor. Bazookia would win with a nice TKO finish, no problems here. Then Herbert Burns, the Tito Jackson to brother Gilbert Burns, would go ahead and knee Julio Arce in the nuts in their fight. Action is stopped, resumed, and less than a minute later, the motherfucker did it again! Nutshots back to back like they're on the cover of Lethal Weapon. Dear Lord! Burns gets the only point deduction in fight for the whole event. You'll realize why that's insane in a bit. He would end up losing that fight via TKO as well. Are you seeing a pattern starting to form here? After a somewhat odd performance by Virna Jandiroba, which included a whole lot of pulling guard and flip-flopping all over the place, Nate the Train Landwehr would knock out Jamal Emmers with some clean boxing, surviving some heavy shots, and a ridiculously nasty cut on the forehead that looked like he got a fade from the hood barber who overdid it with the part. That would round out the prelims, aka the calm before the shitstorm. The main card started with a snoozer between Chidi Njokuani and Reese McKee, with his tattoos that look perilously close to being Aryan Nation, but I didn't see any 88s, so they're probably not that. Anyway, the final decision to that fight took a while, as several of the New Jersey State Athletic Control Board members may still be learning how to count. That would end up being a split decision, with two judges giving the fight 30-27 to Chidi, and one inexplicably giving it to McKee as a 29-28. Your guess is as good as mine as to how the fuck that happens. Commission-appointed judges consider this a verbal warning. In the next fight, Canadian Kyle Nelson would take on Bill Algeo. If you've ever seen Algeo fight, you'll know that Bill has a very fun to watch, very fluid style of fighting and can take a lot of damage. I can think of several times that I've seen Algeo wobbled significantly, only to come back and win. Well, perhaps Gary Copeland hasn't watched as many Algeo fights as I have, because after a few heavy shots that buckled Bill's knees, Copeland stepped in and stopped the fight, with both fighters still on their feet. Being generous, this still isn't the worst stoppage I've ever seen, but it certainly wasn't great. Not being generous, this was an early stoppage. This next fight, however, is where things really start to go sideways. Towards the end of the first round between the Uzbek Nassertan Ruziboev and the Florida domestic batterer Cedricus Dumas, Dumas gets an eye poke. The referee, Vitor Ribeiro, completely misses said eye poke as he was focused on Ruziboev, and then realizes Dumas has stopped fighting and continues to not stop the fight to figure out why. Ruziboev, who did the exact right thing when a referee hasn't intervened, casually strolls up to Dumas and proceeds to TKO him with literally zero opposition from Dumas, who was still wondering why the fuck he hadn't heard the word time called in the prior 10 seconds. Now again, being generous, one could say, hey, the ref missed the eye poke, he's a greenhorn, East Coaster, he only refs in New Jersey, mistakes happen. And as Chris Weidman would condescendingly explain later in the evening, if the ref doesn't call a timeout, it's the responsibility of Cedricus Dumas to continue fighting. Well, there's also a goddamn responsibility levied on the cage side officials, and that is where the ball was truly dropped here. These goddamn officials with the replay system in full effect reviewed the footage and didn't rule the thing a no contest. What the fuck are you looking at when you look at that replay, Mr. Reviewer Man? You got reruns of Boardwalk Empire playing on those monitors? Commission review officials, consider this your hard warning. So anyway, the fight I'm about to describe to you here is where the trash is piled highest and the matchstick is struck. We've got Chris Weidman, possibly in his retirement fight, against Bruno Silva, who is as Bruno Silva as ever. Through one round, Weidman looked to be in terrific shape. His strength was still there, he was moving nicely, he was throwing the cursed leg and it looked healthy. Things were going good for him. And then came the fingers. The first of what would become many eye pokes to occur was in the second round, with Bruno Silva taking the brunt of an extended Weidman digit. Back again is Gary Copeland, action is halted. Silva needs a towel for the eye, Gary Copeland asks for one, and then there is somehow a long-form discussion about whether or not the doctor is needed. Was he speaking French, motherfucker? Towel, doctor. It doesn't take the ears of Forrest Griffin to hear the difference. The action resumes, the fight is heating up, and the round ends with this dope moment of intensity. However, in the third round, the wheel breaks clean off the axle, starting with the next smattering of eye pokery. Almost immediately, Weidman hits Silva with back-to-back eye pokes, the second being worse than the first. Silva drops to his knees, the action is halted again, and it turns out that Silva actually had also poked Weidman in the eye in the same exchange. So now we're up to 4 eye pokes between 2 fighters if you're keeping score at home. After the simultaneous orbital prodding, we resume again with a warning to both fighters, and still, Weidman is continuing to lead with his fingers, as he has been for the entire fight. I mean, he's full out extended waving those things, looking like he's casting spells right alongside the chicks from The Craft. Less than a minute later, it looks like Weidman may have gotten another sneaky eye poke in there, but Silva shrugs it off because really, what's another eye poke between friends at this point? But the grand finale, in this operatic display of fuckery, is something that probably has happened at some point in the past, but nevertheless is a first for me. In the finishing sequence of this fight, Chris Weidman appears to land a beautiful 1-2 combo that sent Silva to the ground. However, and very emphatically, Silva immediately gets up and begins protesting. Upon watching the replay, we'd find out why that was. Chris Weidman did indeed land a 1-2 combination of motherfucking eye pokes! 1 poke to one eye, 1 poke to the other eye. 2 hands, 2 eyes, 2 pokes. Silva's corner saw it, and Chris Weidman acknowledged it, while simultaneously telling Silva, yeah, he poked him, but you can't go to the ground like that. Shut the fuck up, Chris, telling this man how he should or shouldn't react to the fucking 5 eye pokes he endured from you in this fight. Silva may have gotten you once, but when you've got his number of fouls quintupled, maybe of all times it would be appropriate for you just to keep your goddamn mouth shut. But most importantly, the replay shows it plain as fucking day. So how, in the name of all that is holy, did this not get called a no contest? New Jersey State Athletic Control Board, you got some fucking splaining to do! In this situation, there are 2 possible endings when it comes to commission intervention. 1, the fight is rightly ruled a no contest, or 2, a point is deducted from Weidman for the 3rd round, and the fight is scored based on the activity of each fighter leading up to the foul occurring. The commission chose the second option, even though a TKO was announced in the cage. That signals 2 things to me. 1, the commission didn't have their story straight by the time the decision was handed down, emblematic of a staff that doesn't know exactly what they're doing. And 2, a few errant eye pokes must have hit them as collateral damage, because there is no way on earth that a sane, well-trained governing body of this sport could watch that replay and see a fight-ending sequence comprised solely of eye pokes after 4 previous eye pokes and not rule it a no contest. In the co-main, Joaquin Buckley got a nice win over a sluggish Vicente Luque, and Manon Fiorot kept Erin Blanchfield at range, countering her way to a decision win while lulling us all to sleep in the process. But I'm not done with this Weidman-Silva situation, so those fights can take a hike. What the hell was the New Jersey Commission thinking? A lot of people online were giving referee Gary Copeland flack for the stoppages and the situation here, but I honestly think that Copeland's piece of the blame pie chart is rather small. However, as the referees, judges, and ringside officiating team are all put in place and governed by the New Jersey State Athletic Control Board, they're all essentially different heads of the same beast in this case, with varying levels of culpability. And in the grander scheme of things, this fight is a signifier of a much larger problem in MMA oversight in general that we have been seeing week after week after week. You see, the commissions are different for every state in the country, and different still when fighting outside of the United States, obviously. As such, depending on what card you're assigned to, and where that card is taking place, you're essentially spinning the wheel of fortune as far as the quality of your commission is concerned. This fact, plus a lack of densely populated talent pools when it comes to commission staffing, and gaps in effectiveness when it comes to the national governing body, i.e. the Association of Boxing Commissions and Combat Sports, or ABC, leads you to situations like the one in the Weidman-Silva fight, in my bird's eye view of an opinion. Obviously, I'm just some schmuck yelling on the internet, but here are a few possible fixes that might help quell these annoying-ass problems as we conclude the autopsy of this cursed event. Step 1. Get more people and make those people better. Fighters should not have to be shaking in their cups at any event held outside of Nevada. If Jason Herzog takes a vacation, it should not be in question whether the ref in the cage or the guys manning the replay monitor actually know how to interpret the actions they are seeing. Increase the number of people in your talent pool and raise the bell curve on the understanding of the rules and regulations. Step 2. Narrow the window of ambiguity. As much as I want the sport to be as no-holds-barred as possible for the sake of its entertainment, when fouls do occur, there needs to be a greater emphasis placed on getting the calls right. Stricter enforcement of the rule set with more point deductions definitely isn't ideal, but if it's the only way to get both the fighters and officials to actually take the rules seriously, then unfortunately, it may be a necessary evil. There also needs to be a greater standard set nationally for all of the individual state sanctioning bodies, which is where the ABC needs to pick up some slack. Step 3, and specifically when it comes to eye pokes, it's really time for the 4-ounce UFC gloves to change. Whether it's Trevor Whitman's design, or the Pride gloves, or some other version entirely, something has got to give here. Equip these fighters with gloves that are more conducive to them more safely conducting themselves inside of the cage. Oh, and Ray Longo, maybe train your boys not to be out here leading with fingers like a goddamn mummy, but that's more of a micro-scale solution in the specific case of Chris Weidman. I don't really have much more to say about the co-main or main events aside from what I already mentioned previously. Buckley looked sharp in victory against Aluke, who looked entirely the opposite. Blanchfield waited too long to get her foot on the gas. Fiorot won and now has to sit on the sidelines waiting for the Ultimate Fighter season that Grasso and Shevchenko have signed on for. The fight was boring. The end. I also don't know how many different ways I can yell about how angry these commissions make me while they do absolutely nothing to improve, so I think we can put this one into the dirt. The moral of the story is that the New Jersey State Athletic Control Board gets a point deduction and deserves to be cut from the roster. And for yelling about mixed martial arts, this is Thinker St. James, reminding you that we've already had some of the wackiest MMA shit of all time happen in 2024, and it's only April.
Change.